So our final session each day will be on what sort of leaders we need to be to meet the call of these times in which we live. Insecure and stress leadership has led to serious falls and disasters amongst leaders in recent times. And so we've actually asked Dr. Rick Thomas, a medical doctor who for many years led our church in Worcester, is now part of our church in Leeds, to talk to us about the importance of the emotional health of leaders and us being sensible and godly in the way that we live. Rick, it's great to have you with us. We love you and honour you, so over to you.
Thanks, Steve, and well done everybody for still being here. We've received a huge amount already, haven't we? Well-being, it's one of the buzzwords of the modern world. If you Google well-being, in less than a second, you will get 360 million results. Well-being is a multi-billion-dollar business, from natural remedies to mindfulness courses to fitness regimes, even putting magnets under your mattress. Everybody wants to be well, but we're not. For all the technological and medical advances of recent years, the statistics for mental health disorders have continued stubbornly to rise. We were in the grip of a pandemic of stress-related disorders long before COVID-19 drew attention to them and indeed aggravated them. And Christians are not immune to stress, of course. There's no vaccine to protect us from its effects. And as leaders, it appears we belong to an especially vulnerable group. But there's good news. Prevention is possible, and that's the point of this seminar. Let's see what Jesus had to say on the subject. We're going to look at a slide from Matthew 11 and read just a couple of verses from that. Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." I'm also going to read it from the Message version. Jesus said, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." So here's Jesus's central thesis. There are two kinds of yoke. One, heavy and burdensome. The other, light and easily worn. In the context, the heavy, burdensome yoke is what the rabbis of the day called the yoke of the law. They preached a performance-based relationship with God. Jesus contrasts this yoke with his yoke, my yoke, as he calls it, a personal relationship with him. For his disciples, the study of Torah is to be replaced by learning from him. And in place of wearying, heavy burdens, he promises soul rest. Now, a relationship with God based on performance isn't limited to the teachers of the law in Jesus's day. Lots of leaders, even today, perhaps even those who love and teach a gospel of grace, can find themselves heavily laden and weary, maybe some even on this call. This is, after all, a conference for leaders. Most of you, by nature, are achievers. You're diligent, devoted, and determined. And there's nothing wrong with those characteristics, of course. But as a package, it should come with a health warning. For it's all too easy for such people to keep giving out sacrificially whilst neglecting to take in sufficiently. And that's an equation that won't balance and that results in emotional and spiritual deficit. It doesn't happen overnight, but little by little, the boundless enthusiasm you start with drains away. Demands grow beyond capacity until you dread opening your email or answering the phone in case yet another need calls for your attention. Something in you starts to rage. It wasn't meant to be like this. But your sense of duty and loyalty and commitment keeps you going deeper and deeper into that deficit zone. We've had enough. Can't go on. Given all we've got to give, running on empty. It's been too much for too long, too relentless, too costly. Unless something changes, we're going to end up having to pull over as the engine splutters to a standstill. I'm grateful to Neil Townsend for sharing something of his journey. We're going to listen to him now. So Neil, thanks ever so much for being willing to take part in this session and for sharing something of your journey with us. We go back a few years now, but I remember that first occasion when we met, and I think it's fair to say that you were in something of a pickle at that point.
I was. All sorts of things were all over the place, a bit like my lockdown hair, completely all over the place. I was having trouble with sleep. I had just been told by my GP that I had chronic fatigue, but I've been fatigued most of my life, so I didn't really know what that meant. When I looked at the world, it wasn't black like people talk about depression, but it was relentlessly grey. I'd lost a lot of normal emotions, but at the same time was very emotional and could be crying for much lighter reason than would make sense if one was normal. I was grumpy with the family, I think. Dee will tell you the details of that more, because at the time you don't realise that your mood has changed. But just all this stuff, and Dee and I would talk about this, and we knew that something was wrong, but we didn't know what. And so I'd come to that camp where we had that meet, we were introduced, and again, there's something just not quite right here. And I had to come to terms through the discussions that happened with you and others with the fact that actually I was basically depressed clinically, and that I had to take that quite seriously, which was not something I'd wanted to do, and in fact had resisted until that point. So,
okay, sorry to interrupt you, but I wonder if you can summarize for us the changes that you made, short-term and longer-term perhaps, and the effect that they have had for you.
So we took some short-term changes that were pretty radical in terms of changing how I did what I did. I went through a phase of brutal delegation and just did it and trusted that God would help those people. I got on medication, which was extremely helpful just to stabilize things so that we could engage with the long-term stuff. And I started talking about what was going on and what was truly happening inside of me and understanding that some more. So those were the key first three steps: delegation, medication, and conversation.
That's very helpful. Sound like a preacher.
There you go.
And, if you could put into one word what you discovered when you started looking at those deeper motivational issues, what would it be?
I think a lot of it wrapped around one thing: affirmation. For whatever reason, as I emerged from childhood, I can't really explain this, but clearly my affirmation was misaligned or not looking. Maybe this is just coming out of teenage. I don't think most people probably have this. I was looking in the wrong places for affirmation. much of it got then aligned into a work ethic, which drove me into the ground. What I unpicked was starting to come to terms with, actually there's a right place for affirmation, and that's in rejoicing in my sonship and delighting in God, and learning that is affirming, not performance, not production, and not anything else. And as a journey, I'm still learning that, but I think I've come a little way since we first met, Rick, in finding that affirmation just in God and in godly things. There are other things that God blesses us with, and it's okay to be affirmed by them. The key is not to be reliant on them. Wrapped into that also was the issue of rest, actually. We all understand that work is a faith issue. For me, I had to learn and start to live that rest is a faith issue. The choice to trust that God is actually doing stuff, and I don't have to do it all. And in fact, I can leave stuff with him. And for me, that became a very active thing. I've always been someone who enjoys exercise. So I made sure that my exercise program was maintained and appropriately prioritized. I made sure that I scheduled time both doing nothing and doing exercise, and doing things that were just, well, godly and fun. And that has been profoundly important in setting balance right and allowing me to keep on growing in healthy affirmation areas, and actually also in delegating, which is key to much of what happens now.
Neil, thanks ever so much for sharing your story. I wish we could talk longer, but time is against us. Appreciate all you've said and for being open and honest with us. All the best to you. God bless.
God bless.
Dave Smith is a well-known church leader in the UK. He's a friend of Salt and Light and a frequent speaker at previous conferences we've had. He recently published a book called God's Plan for Your Well-Being. And in it, he pictures our lives as having 6 different but interrelated tanks, each having a dial on our dashboard. These 6 key areas are physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, financial, and vocational. Each is vital and all are linked, meaning that an increase or decrease in well-being in any one of those areas is likely to have an impact on one or all of the others. It's a great book and I commend it to you. Today, we are focusing on just 2 of those areas, emotional and spiritual health. But before we go on to look at some of the things that we can do to avoid reaching empty in those tanks, let me just say this. There is a degree of exhaustion where only prolonged rest will allow health to return. The point of this seminar, of course, is to alert us to our risks earlier in the process, because burnout, once reached, has no quick fixes. But if we have reached that point, then prolonged rest, time out from the source of the stress, will likely be needed. And not just a week or even a month, but as a rule of thumb, for every year we've been living under that unrelenting pressure that has ended in burnout, we should be thinking in terms of a week out of the role. But let's think more positively about prevention, some of the ways in which we can build resilience. What does the rest that Jesus promises look like? Let's start with sleep. I love the story of Elijah. He was someone who reached the end of his resources pretty dramatically. 1 Kings 19, he's exhausted physically, emotionally, and spiritually. He's just been through the confrontation with the prophets of Baal, only to be faced with the threat to his life from Queen Jezebel. He flees, running and walking for over 100 miles. He's ready to collapse. He's ready to quit. He's lost all sense of perspective, and he's feeling sorry for himself and as if life is thoroughly unfair. Ever felt like Elijah at this point of his story? But I love the way God draws alongside and rescues him. And the first thing God prescribes is sleep. And after he's slept, God wakes him only to feed him and then let him sleep some more. Elijah needed sleep. There would be other things to say to Elijah, but physical rest was his most pressing need. Folk, don't neglect your sleep. Now, someone out there is thinking, chance would be a fine thing. You've got a small baby and sleep is routinely disturbed. And of course, there are seasons when good quality sleep is hard to come by. But most of us, for most of the time, get to choose how long we sleep. We're told that most adults need between 6 and 8 hours sleep in order to thrive. If we want to sleep well, then we need to prepare well for sleep. Some people swear by having a long hot bath, but I'd be afraid of falling asleep and waking up when the water's gone cold and I look like a crinkled prune. So here's some other tips. I want to suggest a few things to avoid, first of all. Screen work in the last hour of the day, late meals, evening alcohol, caffeine at any time beyond lunch. But also a few things to remember. Remember before sleep to reflect on the day. Even if, like me, you may fall asleep while you do so. Remember what went well and be thankful. Cultivate that attitude of gratitude. You can't be grumpy and grateful at the same time. Were there things you wish you had or hadn't said? Don't lie awake, racked with regret. Seek forgiveness from God and make a note to put it right tomorrow with anyone you might have hurt. Deal quickly with any anger or disappointment so that your mind and emotions can rest and heal while you sleep. Here's another aspect of rest that God has given us. You know this well, the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath is for wimps, right? Well, not right. It's for those who believe that God knows better than we do. It's meant to be a holy, that is, a different kind of day. Not a day for catching up with chores, but a day to do those things that we know refresh us, but for which there's often not time in the usual way. Perhaps time with family or friends. There is a kind of muscular evangelicalism that has made light of the Sabbath in recent times. But God's arithmetic says 6 days go further than 7. So just do it. We know we should every week. And can I suggest we don't just stop there? Add a mini break into every term. And at some point in the year, take a proper 2-week holiday, because 1 week is never enough, is it? There's nothing noble about overworking and ignoring the Sabbath principle. It's just plain disobedience. And a word to those of you who are senior leaders. Remember, others are watching you. Your example calibrates what they feel is expected of them. Can I suggest a third element in the rest that God has given us? It's your sweet spot. Now, I'm an enthusiastic, though not very good, squash player. And on the few occasions when I do manage to hit the ball in the center of the racket, in the sweet spot, I am amazed at the ease with which power is generated. If only it happened more frequently. The point is, we each need to know who we are and who we are not. Can I gently suggest a couple of things to avoid? Don't compare yourself to others, and don't strain for what you perceive to be promotion. Church traditions like ours tend to make much of people at the front, and this can encourage an unhealthy longing for prominence. We need to remember, don't we, that the best that we can be for God is the person God made us to be. Serving outside of our gift or outside the measure of grace that God has given us at this time in our lives proves to be a heavy and wearisome burden. We are less fulfilled as well as less fruitful. But when you're in your sweet spot, the yoke is easy and light. So know who you are and serve there. Let's return to the scripture, because Jesus invites us to come to him. He lifts the heavy yoke of performance off our shoulders and gives us rest. But then he offers us a light and easy yoke to bear, his yoke. And it's all tied up with learning what the Message version describes as the unforced rhythms of grace. I'm going to suggest some habits to establish or to recover, and also a couple to lose that will help us maintain emotional and spiritual health. These won't be new to you, but there's a world of difference between knowing something and putting it into practice. First on, let go of control. The need to hold on to control is a heavy yoke to carry. Moreover, it condemns us to smallness because we have only limited capacity, and if we can't give away authority to others, they will get frustrated and leave, and we will be unhappy, exhausted, and quite possibly on the road to sickness. So if you have control issues, get some help. If you have to know everything, if everything has to go through you, then think about getting some help. It'll restore your joy, release growth in other people's leadership, rescue you from exhaustion, sleeplessness, high blood pressure, and a host of other nasties. It will exchange that heavy yoke for a light and easy one. Second thing, let go of hurry. Feeling every minute of the day, filling every moment of the day is not a virtuous thing. Busyness does not necessarily mean fruitfulness. At a certain stage, I kept 4 black bags under a table in the hallway of our house. One was a medical bag as I was working part-time in the hospital. Another was my teacher's bag for the maths lessons that I was teaching at the local Christian school. Another was my church bag with all the admin stuff in it that went with that role. And the last thing was the bag containing my squash kit, because at 4:40 on a Friday afternoon, I would pick that one up and join battle on the court and forget all the other ones. I was overly busy, and I needed to appear busy. I was living, however, an emotional and spiritually unhealthy existence. Busyness was an addiction. And if, like me, you are activistic, well then, like me, why don't you read John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry? I found it hugely helpful, and I'm sure you will too. Refresh your devotional life. Bring the changes. Try a different Bible reading plan. Or if you haven't got one, well, try starting one. The Bible in 1 Year is an app available all over the world. Nikki and Pippa Gumble have written it, and it's brilliant. Lectio 365, something put together by the 24/7 prayer folks, again, is an excellent Bible reading plan. If you've been doing the same thing for ages, well, make a change. I've just finished a two-volume series of studies in the life of David by Pete Wilcox. They're called Walking the Walk and Talking the Talk. Pete Wilcox is a senior member of the cathedral staff at Lichfield, a canon of the cathedral. He comes from a different church background. He writes from a different tradition. He brings different insights, and it's refreshing. If your prayer life is in something of a rut, why not pray some set prayers? Not everything liturgical is evil. Christians from our sorts of churches can miss out on some of the riches of other ages and other traditions. For example, since reading Dave Smith's book, I've begun to use the prayer of awareness, better known for some as the daily examen. It was developed way back in the 16th century by St. Ignatius of Loyola. I never thought I would end up reading that, but I've loved it. It's based around a couple of verses in Psalm 139. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's anything offensive in me and lead me in the way everlasting. It's just a tool, but it's a wonderful aid to reflection and prayer. It's different and it's refreshing. Discover some solitude. Henri Nouwen says, without solitude, it's virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. It is, after all, what Jesus did. We live at a frenetic pace, most of us, and are bombarded with different forms of communication the whole day long. Stillness and solitude is hard to find, but we have to make room for it if we want to hear clearly. Lastly, why not consider inviting someone to be your spiritual director for a season? Perhaps someone from a more contemplative tradition. The motivation Dave Smith had in writing his book was that he had discovered a fear of failure that was robbing him of peace. And amongst other things that he felt God prompted him to do in working through that problem was to seek the wisdom of a spiritual director. He does say in his book, that it's been one of the best discoveries of his life, and he wished he'd found it earlier. Refresh your devotional life, refresh also your creative life. We're all made in the image of a creator, so it's in us somewhere to be creative. Dig it out and feed it. Take up something new, join a choir, learn to paint in watercolors, keep bees, learn to salsa, join a bridge club, whatever. Make it fun. We do need to make time for fun and to make time for friends at the same time. Fun shared is fun multiplied. Build such creative and fun times into every week of your diary. And finally, and perhaps most important of all, refresh your meekness. That may sound strange, but in our reading, Jesus says, "Learn of me, for I am humble and gentle of heart, and you will find soul rest." I've been really struck by Jesus' choice of words here. Not determined and persistent, not bold and courageous, but humble and gentle. Jesus seems to be saying that soul rest, emotional and spiritual health, comes by learning from him, and specifically by learning humility and gentleness. Friends, I believe this could be the most important point I will make to you today. The strength that Jesus demonstrated and that he asks us to learn from him is very different from the popular notion of strength. The strength we're asked to cultivate is a broken strength, a tamed strength, a gentle strength. In older versions of the Bible in English, the word used is meekness. It's the word used of a powerful wild horse that has been lovingly broken in. Its spirit is not crushed, but it's learned to be mastered. Its strength is harnessed and directed according to the will of the rider. Tamed strength in the hands of the master. That's the picture here. Learn, says Jesus, to be meek. In English, the word sounds rather like the word weak, but it actually means exactly the opposite. Captured, controlled, and gentle strength. The meek person has given up defending themselves. Oh, they'll fight fearlessly for truth and on behalf of the defenseless, that they won't fight for themselves. They've nothing to defend. The meek person's reputation is of no account to them. They refuse to bite back or take offense, or permit self-pity, or to carry a grievance. Meek leaders forbear when others behave badly towards them and forgive quickly. Meek leaders realize that being misunderstood and misrepresented, misquoted and maligned is all part of the job. They accept that blame and responsibility for failings elsewhere will often be directed at them. And they have learned in their meekness to suck it up and let it pass. Like Paul, they've come to understand that very often God's strength is revealed through their own weakness. Their yoke is light. Meek leaders are humble. They know themselves to be sinners. They know they deserve nothing but hell, but they know too that they've been saved by grace and will receive mercy, not judgment. Such persons live lives of constant gratitude for that grace and mercy. They serve not to impress God or others, not to gain prestige or popularity, but in response to the love that they themselves have received. They don't promote themselves. If they serve well and are honored by others, then they give the glory back to God. They know their life is hidden with Christ in God and that nothing and no one can separate them from God's love, God's affirmation, and that's all they need in this life. They look forward one day to hearing the words from Jesus, "Well done, good and faithful servant," and that's enough. Their yoke is light. Take my yoke upon you. Learn to do it my way and with me, and you will have soul rest. Lord, give us a broken and contrite heart. Help us to grow in meekness, humility, and gentleness, and to lead like you. Friends, we each have a yoke. There's work to be done, and Jesus called us to work and to walk with him. The work requires sacrifice and stamina. To flourish, to live a life of sustainable sacrifice, to burn without being consumed, we do well to learn the unforced rhythms of grace, the wise ways of God, and most of all, the humble, gentle, and meek heart of Jesus, to keep us going, whatever, and to keep us sweet throughout. We can be confident that he walks with us, will keep us on track, and that he will lean into that yoke to steady our steps when the way is steep or the ground is heavy. Walking this way, we shall enjoy soul rest in both the darkest valleys and by still waters. And we shall find that weariness and burnout are kept far from our door, and that his service sits lightly and easily on our shoulders. Amen. And back to you, Steve.